1794, Haydn came to Britain for a second time with a visit that proved to be every bit as triumphant as the first, and again lasting about 18 months. Widespread public affection for Haydn hadn't diminished, especially amongst the ladies. Haydn, whose wife stayed home in Austria during these visits, once said that he couldn't understand how he'd been loved by so many pretty women, claiming they can't have been drawn by my beauty. Probably the most significant relationship Haydn had during his time in London was with the widow of the former master of the King's Music, herself a pianist, Rebecca Schroeter. Haydn later told his biographer that he would have married her very easily had I been free at the time.
Perhaps some of the youthful energy of this liaison with Rebecca Schroeter is reflected in the three great piano trios that Haydn completed on this second London visit and dedicated to her. For me, it was fascinating to find evidence of Mrs. Schroeter's intimacy with the older composer. Her signature on a contract that Haydn made with the London publisher at the end of his second visit, now housed in the British Library.
Simon, it looks, well, highly legal.
Well, indeed, it was a legal document, but I think it was gives us an idea of how Haydn was engaged with the commercial world in London. So what we've got here is an agreement with the publisher Hyde, and it's quite a long shopping list, actually. If you have a look at what he indicated he might write, symphonies, quartets, piano sonatas, piano trios, English songs, Italian songs, catches and glees, the whole range of different genres that might have been available at the time. And one of the things which is really interesting about this catalogue is that we've got here 3 grand symphonies, £100.
A lot of money.
That's a lot of money. But then you look over here and we've got 3 piano trios, as we would now call them. Much smaller scale pieces, easier and quicker to compose, £75.
So what we're talking about is the domestic music market, aren't we? Which I guess is a burgeoning thing here, the idea that your front room became your own little private concert hall.
Absolutely, and of course we should bear in mind from the point of view of the publisher that if you sold a set of parts for symphonies, how many people across the country were going to be able to buy those parts and put on these symphonies? What really made the money was the music for the drawing room, and that was typically the piano music that was played by women, by the daughters of the household. It was an accomplishment that might lead you to the perfect husband, one might say. We see that, of course, in the novels of Jane Austen, for example. Or, on the other hand, songs. Very astute of Hyde to include some English songs in the list of pieces that he hoped Haydn might produce.
But also, presumably, rather astute of Haydn. Haydn could see here was a gaping need, and he's writing all these canzonettas, presumably with an eye on the money he was going to make.
Well, absolutely, and here we are again, if we just have a look at this here. 6 English songs with accompaniment for pianoforte, £75 again.
That's a remarkable amount of money to pay.
Sunbeams play on the green and glassy sea. Come and I will lead the way where the pearly treasures be. Come and I will lead the way.
This must have been amazing for Haydn, who'd been pretty much indentured all of his adult life, his professional life, to be coming and to be doing deals with a publisher in London which were going to get him untold sums of money.
Well, Haydn, I must say, was a very acute businessman in that sense, almost too acute. He did tend to sell things several times around Europe. They didn't have the same copyright, ideas that we have nowadays.
So you mean you could sell one piece to different people for different sums of money all at the same time?
As long as it was in a different country, that was kind of all right.
Follow, follow, follow me. Follow, follow, follow me.
In Britain and the rest of Europe, one of the great love affairs of the time was with all things Scottish. Here, Haydn cannily spotted another rich seam to mine and was easily persuaded to start work on commercial arrangements of Scottish folk song for the domestic market.
To what extent was this, well, Haydn's very vigorous publication of all these so-called Scottish folk songs, to what extent was it building this sense of the mythology of the north of Britain?
Oh, I think hugely. And of course Haydn's just one of a whole handful of European composers who do this kind of job. A lot of publications appear in Scotland with local, much less well-known musicians doing arrangements. And then towards the end of the 18th century, Haydn does some arrangements for a London publisher, and then George Thomson appears on the scene, and he's the big daddy of this process. And to be honest, I don't know that either of them at that particular point realised how big a project this would end up being.
Would Haydn have actually heard authentic Scottish folk song and music?
Highly unlikely, I think, is the answer. I mean, Haydn sadly doesn't come north of the border, unlike some of the other composers who do set Scottish songs. But he does experience performances in London, and Scotch songs, as they're termed at that time, are really popular from the early 18th century. And they're popular on a really popular level, so they're performed at Vauxhall Gardens, they're performed in cantatas on the concert platform. But more importantly, a lot of these publications are created for domestic performance.
Should all the quanterns be forgot and never brought to mind? Should all the quanterns be forgot and auld lang syne? For auld lang syne, my dear, for auld lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for auld lang syne.
Auld Lang Syne is a very old tradition in Scotland as a song of parting, frequently sung at social events. Of course, the one that we sing and the one that we constantly refer to is the version that Robert Burns wrote.
We twa here in a boat, the braes and put the gowans fine.
Auld Lang Syne was just one of a staggering 400 Scottish folk songs that Haydn arranged to meet the positively insatiable public demand of the time.
Nowadays, I think a lot of people feel very negative about them. You know, what was Thomson doing asking Haydn to touch these melodies that he knew nothing about? How dare he? But at the time, I think what Thomson was doing, you know, was made perfect sense to him. You know, he was inspired by new European music and he loved his national music and he wanted to bring the two together.
Both Haydn's extended visits to Britain had been successes beyond his wildest dreams. Our streets really had been paved with gold for him. But the frenetic pace of London was eventually too much for the elderly composer, and in 1795 Haydn made a final parting. Now he wanted time to crystallise the ideas and experiences of these 4 years in some of his greatest late works.
Haydn spent the last 14 years of his life in Austria, riding high off the back of his successes in Britain, not least the money he'd made, which allowed him, amongst other things, to build this luxurious house on the outskirts of Vienna. But something that had really inspired Haydn about his time in Britain was their expression of nationhood through a single song. Britain was the first country to have a national anthem. And Haydn thought to himself, Austria needs one of these too. So he wrote one.